Caroline Monroe felt a warmth in her heart as she watched the children's smiling faces through the window. From her small office at the Sprite Future Children's Support Center in the suburbs of Boston, Massachusetts, she observed the children playing in the playground. In her 12 years as a social worker, Caroline had touched the lives of hundreds of children in difficult circumstances. On her desk lay the plans for the next summer camp. This camp provided nature experiences and opportunities for personal growth to economically disadvantaged children, a project Caroline had been passionate about for 5 years. This year, she was particularly struggling with fundraising. She calculated that with $10,000, she could include 15 more children in the program. At it again, Caroline? Her colleague Martha entered the office with a laugh. Still here on a Friday night? No date? Caroline smiled. No, but that's okay. I need to figure out the summer camp budget. You're always thinking about others. You should think about yourself sometimes. Martha's words mixed kindness with concern. This conversation was a familiar one. Her friends, and her family too, couldn't understand why Caroline devoted most of her time and resources to her work. Her mobile phone rang, displaying "Mom" on the screen. Caroline hesitated slightly before answering. Hello, Mom. Caroline. You haven't forgotten about tomorrow's family gathering, have you? Dorothy Monroe's voice carried its usual urgency. I remember. I plan to come at 2 in the afternoon. Brenda has an important announcement. Don't be late. Caroline sighed inwardly. When it came to her sister Brenda, family priorities always shifted dramatically. I understand, Mom. I'll be careful not to be late. After hanging up, Caroline gazed out the window. Thinking about tomorrow's family gathering stirred the usual complex emotions within her. She loved her sister, there was no doubt about that. But the reality that Brenda was always the center of the family, and her demands and achievements were always prioritized, was sometimes painful. The next day, Caroline arrived at the family home in the Boston suburbs. The 2-story Monroe house was where she had grown up. Her parents had continued to live there after her father Fred's retirement. When she opened the front door, she heard laughter and conversation from inside. Entering the living room, she found her parents, Brenda, and an unfamiliar man. Caroline, you're finally here. Brenda excitedly rushed forward and hugged her sister. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, and her designer dress accentuated her beauty. Sorry I'm late. There was traffic. In truth, Caroline had been late because she was finishing up some paperwork, but she didn't mention that. Let me introduce you, Brenda reached toward the unfamiliar man. This is Michael Stapleton. My fiancé. Caroline couldn't hide her surprise. Fiancé? Since when? He proposed last week. Brenda raised her left hand, showing off a large diamond ring. I kept it as a surprise. Michael stood up and extended his hand to Caroline. Finally we meet. I've heard a lot about you from Brenda. He was a man with a charming smile and confident manner. Congratulations, Caroline smiled and shook his hand. It's quite a surprise, but I'm very happy for you. Your sister is a special woman, Michael put his arm around Brenda's waist. I've had success in real estate development, but I've never met a woman like her before. Dorothy could barely contain her joy at her daughter's engagement. Michael is a wonderful man. He's a businessman who has developed several luxury properties in New York and Boston. Fred Monroe smiled gently and said, Sit down, Caroline. Today is a special day. Her father was a retired high school teacher, always a quiet presence. He had little say in family matters, often yielding to the strong personalities of Dorothy and Brenda. During dinner, the conversation centered almost entirely on Brenda and Michael's wedding plans. Michael spoke confidently, discussing his ambitious plans in the real estate industry. Caroline nodded and listened most of the time, but occasionally she sensed something behind his words. She was particularly troubled by the gleam in his eyes when he talked about redeveloping downtown districts. At the end of the meal, Brenda handed Caroline an envelope. Here's your wedding invitation. We've already set the date of June 25th, 3 months from now. Of course, we'll arrange a special seat for you. Caroline opened the envelope and took out the invitation. It was beautifully designed, with the date and location noted. But she gasped at an additional line written below. Request to attendees, please provide a wedding gift of at least $10,000 if you plan to attend. Caroline was speechless with surprise. Seeing her expression, Dorothy laughed and said, "Of course, she's your sister. Brenda is planning a wonderful wedding. You should support her." Caroline looked at Brenda and Michael. They looked back at her as if this was perfectly normal. Fred sat quietly, avoiding eye contact. "I understand," Caroline replied quietly.
Do you know some people earn over $10,000 a month just by posting Reddit stories on YouTube? No face, no voice, just a laptop. I do it too. Link below if you're curious.
I'll think about it. On her way home, she called her best friend, Audrey Walker. "I can't believe it, Audrey. $10,000. That's about the same as my summer camp budget." "That's absurd," Audrey's voice was filled with indignation. "There might be something suspicious going on." "I was thinking the same thing. There's something strange about this Michael person. But Brenda seems really smitten with him." Caroline returned to her apartment and placed the invitation on the table. She looked up at the night sky through her window, wondering what she should do. $10,000 was not a small amount for her. It was money that could help the children she supported. But at the same time, she loved her sister. Despite their complicated relationship, family was family. Caroline sighed deeply and decided to go to sleep. Morning light streamed through the window of Caroline's apartment. She sat on her bed, staring at the invitation in her hands. The beautiful lace border and high-quality paper were a perfect choice, typical of Brenda. For 3 days, her heart had been constricted every time she looked at this invitation. She took out an album from the old wooden bookshelf in the corner of her room. Filled with childhood photos, it was one of her treasured possessions. As she turned the pages, she found a picture of 2 girls hugging and smiling. Caroline and Brenda, at 10 and 4 years old. "I never thought things would turn out this way," Caroline whispered softly. As a child, Brenda had looked at her sister with adoring eyes. Caroline had protected her, taught her, laughed with her, and sometimes cried with her. But as Brenda entered her teens and her beauty and charm began to attract attention, everything started to change. Their parents, especially their mother, praised Brenda's talents and beauty, placing her at the center of the family. When it came time for college, Caroline chose to study social welfare on a scholarship, while her parents spared no expense for Brenda's costly private university. After graduation, as Caroline took on challenging work in the community, Brenda found success as a model and built connections in high society. On the last page of the album was a family photo from 2 years ago. On the surface, they looked like a happy family, but Caroline couldn't help feeling the distance behind those smiles. Is a man she met half a year ago more important than her sister? Caroline wondered, looking at the amount written on the invitation. She opened her laptop and checked her bank balance. She had sufficient savings. But most of it was set aside for the children's summer camp. Using $10,000 as a wedding gift would mean denying 15 children the opportunity to attend camp. Caroline took a deep breath and asked herself, "What do I really want to do?" The phone rang. It was Audrey calling. "How are you doing? Have you decided about that invitation?" "Not yet. On one hand, they're family, and I want to support Brenda on her happy day. But $100,000 is an unreasonable demand, especially for you." "It's not $100,000, it's $10,000, Caroline corrected. "Either way, it's a lot of money. Especially considering how much you already give to others." Audrey continued carefully, choosing her words. "You should be honest with yourself. This is not just for Brenda, but for yourself too." After ending the conversation, Caroline had a sudden thought and decided to search online for Michael Stapleton. He was indeed a successful real estate developer. Several photos of luxury condominiums and office buildings appeared. But digging deeper, she also found articles about protests from community groups. There were criticisms that Michael's development projects were driving out low-income residents and dividing communities. What particularly caught her eye was an article about a place called Bright Future Community Park in western Boston. It was adjacent to the land used by the children's center Caroline supported. The article said Michael's company had purchased the land and planned to build luxury condominiums. No way. Caroline stared at the screen, suddenly feeling like pieces were connecting. That night, she fell into an uneasy sleep. In her dreams, young Brenda called out, "Help me, Caroline," intermingled with images of adult Brenda showing off her diamond ring. In the morning, Caroline awoke determined. She took the invitation and checked the decline box. Then, she took out a new sheet of paper and began writing a long letter. "Dear Brenda." As she wrote, tears welled up in Caroline's eyes. But they weren't tears of sadness, they were tears of determination. She loved her sister. That's why she felt things couldn't continue this way. After finishing the letter, she selected several special photos from the old album. She also found a friendship bracelet they had made together as children, and a small angel figurine Brenda had given Caroline on her 18th birthday. She then took out a USB drive and connected it to her computer. Through her work, she had obtained some information about Michael's development plans. It all began to make sense. Michael's company had purchased the land next to the children's center, threatening to take away the space needed for the center's activities. And part of the funding for that development might come from the wedding gift demanded of her. More importantly, did Brenda know about all this? Caroline copied the files to the USB drive and placed it in the envelope. Photos, letter, bracelet, angel figurine, and USB drive. Her true gift wasn't money. It was truth and the memory of a forgotten sisterly bond. "I'll give this envelope to her in person on the wedding day," Caroline decided. She didn't plan to attend the ceremony, but would appear only during the reception time to deliver this special gift with her own hands. On the wedding day, the luxurious Garden Hotel in the Boston suburbs was bustling with activity from early morning. An elegant sign reading, "Brenda and Michael Wedding," stood at the entrance, which was decorated with white roses and purple lavender. The June sunlight bathed the venue in gold, promising a perfect day for a wedding. Caroline stood in front of the mirror in her apartment, wearing a simple turquoise silk dress. She had styled her hair in an elegant updo and wore a necklace, a present from Brenda on her 16th birthday. She looked at the white envelope on the table. The moment of decision was approaching. Originally, Caroline had planned not to attend the ceremony, only the reception. But something made her change her mind. In continuing her investigation into Michael's company, she had discovered more information. In particular, she felt she needed to know just how involved Brenda was in this development plan. She picked up the envelope, took a deep breath, and left her apartment. Arriving at the venue, Caroline saw many guests already seated. She quietly slipped into a seat near the back. Most guests didn't notice her, but her mother Dorothy, sitting in the front row, showed a surprised expression when she spotted her daughter. During the ceremony, Caroline sat quietly, observing her sister. Brenda looked radiantly beautiful. Her white wedding dress was a custom-made luxury brand piece that highlighted her perfect silhouette. Michael also looked refined in his tuxedo, exuding the air of a wealthy, successful man. On the surface, it was a perfect wedding, but Caroline noticed something unnatural. When Michael whispered something into Brenda's ear before the vow kiss, she thought she saw a momentary tension cross her face. She also noticed that some of the guests seated in the front row were unfamiliar to her. They appeared to be Michael's business associates. After the ceremony, as guests moved to the reception hall, Dorothy approached Caroline. "I didn't think you would come," she said, taking her daughter's arm. "About the gift." Caroline smiled. "Don't worry, Mom. I brought a gift for Brenda." She showed the white envelope. Dorothy seemed relieved. "I'm glad you made the right decision. Family must be cherished." At the reception, lavish food and champagne were being served. An orchestra played elegant music, and guests were congratulating the bride and groom. Caroline sat alone, observing her surroundings. She tried to listen to the conversations of Michael's apparent business partners, but the music was too loud to hear clearly. As time passed, the moment for gift exchange arrived. The master of ceremonies took the microphone and mentioned the gifts brought by the guests. Most guests seem to have brought checks or cash. And now, the bride and groom will receive your heartwarming presents. Caroline took a deep breath and stood up. She approached Brenda and smiled gently. Congratulations. This is my gift for my sister. She handed the envelope to Brenda. Brenda laughed brightly. Her eyes sparkled with expectation. Thank you, Caroline, she joked. It's not money, is it? The surrounding guests laughed, watching with curious eyes. Clearly, many of them knew about the special condition on the invitation. Michael looked at Caroline with a greedy expression. Open it, Caroline said quietly. Brenda began to open the envelope. Only Caroline noticed that her fingertips were trembling slightly. As Brenda took out the contents, her expression changed. Her expectant, excited smile suddenly transformed into confusion and fear. Caroline could see the blood draining from her face. This is... Brenda's voice trembled. Michael placed his hand on her shoulder and peered at the contents. What is this? He asked, irritation in his voice. Photos and a letter and... Brenda took the USB drive in her hand and looked at Caroline with a confused expression. Caroline said quietly, this is a gift of truth. Because I believe this is what real family bonds are about. The venue fell silent for a moment. Many guests were confused, not understanding what was happening. Dorothy rushed to Brenda's side and looked at the envelope's contents. A look of surprise crossed her face. Just old photos, Dorothy said. Caroline, what is this about? This isn't appropriate for a wedding celebration. I didn't bring money, Mom, Caroline replied calmly. I brought something of greater value. Brenda took the letter and began to open it. Her hands were shaking, and tears were visible in her eyes. Michael impatiently grabbed her shoulder and said, read it later. Now we should, but Brenda pushed his hand away. Let me read it, her voice contained determination. The surrounding guests began to realize that something dramatic was happening. Murmurs spread through the venue, and some stood up, changing positions to see better. Michael picked up the USB drive and asked, what is this? His voice was filled with tension. Fear spread across Brenda's face. You don't need to look at it, she said, but several guests were already showing interest. Particularly, Michael's apparent business partners had come forward. Caroline quietly said, there's no need to fear the truth. As tensions mounted, Michael inserted the USB into a laptop that had been placed on a front table. In the reception hall where a large screen was set up, the image was immediately displayed. There appeared a document titled, Bright Future Community Park Redevelopment Plan. This document, bearing Michael's company logo, detailed plans to transform the entire area, including the land used by the Children's Support Center, into luxury condominiums. Even more shocking was the funding plan for the project, which included a note, donations from private investors, target amount $100,000. The venue erupted in commotion. Michael hurriedly tried to turn off the screen, but many people had already seen the content. He directed an angry look at Caroline. This is private information. How did you get it? Caroline didn't answer, but her eyes were on her sister. Brenda had finished reading the letter and looked up. Tears of regret and shame glistened in her eyes. Caroline? She whispered. I didn't know. Really? Michael tried to close the laptop screen, but it was too late. His business partners had already seen the content and were exchanging confused glances. Brenda stood there, staring at the photos she had received from Caroline. They showed the two of them embracing and smiling by the lake as children, baking cookies together as teenagers, and Caroline congratulating Brenda at her college graduation. She took the old bracelet in her hand, and her fingers trembled. Do you know what this is? Caroline began speaking quietly, addressing the gathered people. A 12-year-old me and a 6-year-old Brenda made this together. It was a promise to protect each other forever. Dorothy stood between her daughters, trying to control the situation. Caroline, this is Brenda's special day. What are you doing? Just revealing the truth, Mom, Caroline answered. Michael is trying to buy the land used by the Children's Support Center to build luxury condominiums. That center is where I've worked for 15 years. He's trying to take away the place that supports these children. Michael stepped forward, his face red with anger. This is purely a business matter. We legally acquired the land and, as part of urban redevelopment. At the expense of children's futures? Caroline interrupted him. Brenda took the USB drive in her hand and looked at Michael with a confused expression. Mikey, is this true? Are you trying to evict Caroline's center? Michael couldn't hide his irritation. You knew about it. The redevelopment plan for that district, we've talked about it many times. But you never said where exactly, Brenda said with a trembling voice. I had no idea Caroline was involved. And the gift request to me, Caroline continued calmly. $10,000. That was supposed to be part of the funding for this development plan, wasn't it? Michael's expression subtly changed. Looking around and feeling the gaze of his business partners, he changed his attitude. That's just a coincidence. Weddings are expensive. A coincidence? Caroline pointed to the screen. Your fundraising plan says donations from private investors, target amount $100,000. It wasn't just me. You demanded the same from other guests, didn't you? Murmurs arose from the venue. Some guests began taking out their invitations, checking them. One male guest stood up and raised his voice. My invitation had the same request. $10,000. I thought it was just a wedding gift, but... Another woman agreed. Mine too. Did Michael think we wouldn't all be connected? The confusion in the hall grew. One of Michael's business partners approached him and whispered in his ear. This concerns our reputation. An explanation is required. Michael's face turned red with anger and humiliation. Look, everyone, he tried to raise his voice, but Brenda grabbed his arm. Is it true? Tears welled in her eyes. You tried to use our wedding to raise funds for your business? Michael shook off her hand. It's business, Brenda. You were supposed to benefit from it. It's for our future. You used me, Brenda's voice was trembling. And my family and friends too. I didn't think you were that naive, Michael said irritably. That district has value. If we don't get it, someone else will. That's business. Hearing those words, Brenda's expression changed. She looked into Caroline's eyes, then opened the letter again. Inside were her sister's heartfelt words, what I want is not money, but the honesty and trust we once had. Dorothy stood by Brenda, placing a hand on her shoulder. It's all right, darling. You can see how selfish Caroline is. Ruining your special day. Brenda pushed her mother's hand away and stepped back. No, Mom. Caroline is right. I've been blind all along. From the back of the venue, Fred stood up. The father who had been sitting quietly until now approached slowly. His posture carried a dignity that had never been seen before. Michael, he said in a firm voice. It's clear that you've used my family. And I, too, have made a mistake by remaining silent for too long. Fred looked at Caroline. His eyes mixed sadness, regret, and pride. Caroline, you've always had courage and integrity. I should have acknowledged that out loud. He turned to Brenda. And you, too, have the eyes to discern true value. Today is the day to prove that. Michael tried to control the situation by raising his voice. Everyone, this is just a family misunderstanding. Let's continue our wedding. Later. No, Brenda's voice was quiet but filled with determination. She removed the diamond ring from her finger. This is over, Michael. She returned the ring to Michael and approached Caroline. The two looked at each other for a long time, as if something was conveyed without words. What I wanted wasn't money, but honesty as a family, Caroline said quietly. She took Brenda's hand and placed the photos and bracelet in her palm. This is what truly matters. The venue fell silent. Michael and his business partners began to leave in anger and confusion. Dorothy looked at her daughters, and for the first time, bowed her head as if acknowledging her mistake. Caroline quietly turned around and started to leave the venue. Brenda grabbed her arm. "Don't go," she said tearfully. "We have so much to do over." In July, Caroline was overseeing the final preparations for the summer camp in the backyard of the Sprite Future Children's Support Center. Dozens of staff members were working together to set up tents and activity stations. The children would enjoy a week-long camp starting tomorrow. Caroline reflected on the past month. Since that wedding, she had immersed herself in work. Michael's development plan had been cancelled, and the news was celebrated as a small victory in the community. But her relationship with her family remained complicated. She hadn't answered several calls from Dorothy. Only short message exchanges with Brenda. Audrey had always been her support, advising, "Don't completely close the door." As Caroline was checking craft materials, she heard a voice calling her from the office. "Caroline, you have a visitor." Heading toward the entrance of the center, she found her father, Fred, standing there. He looked a bit thinner, and his expression showed fatigue, but his eyes held a determined look. "Dad," Caroline said in surprise. "Why are you here?" "I wanted to talk," Fred said quietly. The two sat on a small bench. "Brenda and Michael's engagement has been officially called off," her father began. "He's facing legal problems. Investors are suing him over his methods." Caroline nodded silently. She had already heard about that. "But there's something more important," Fred continued. "Brenda and your mother made big mistakes. Especially toward you. I'm just as guilty." I looked the other way and said nothing. Tears welled up in Caroline's eyes at his sincere words. "Brenda is truly remorseful," Fred said gently. "She's trying to change. She started volunteering at a local shelter last week. She's facing her mistakes." Caroline took a deep breath. "I may not be able to forgive immediately. But there's room for dialogue." Fred smiled. "I'm glad to hear that." He stood up and placed his hand on Caroline's shoulder. "Caroline, you're a wonderful daughter. I always knew that. I just never put it into words. That was my biggest mistake." After he left, Caroline felt enveloped in complex emotions, yet somewhere in her heart, she felt a lightness. On the first day of summer camp, morning light filtered through the trees, and the center's backyard was filled with children's laughter. Caroline distributed name tags, greeting each child with a smile. At that moment, a familiar figure appeared at the entrance of the center. It was Brenda. She was wearing simple jeans and a t-shirt, her hair not in its usual perfect style but casually tied in a ponytail. She held a large paper bag in her hands. The two sisters stared at each other from a distance for a moment. As Caroline approached, Brenda smiled sheepishly. "I came to help," she said. "If that's okay." Her paper bag contained art supplies for the children. Caroline, though a bit hesitant, nodded. A few hours later, the two were surrounded by children, painting together by the lakeside. Watching Brenda gently teaching a little girl how to use a brush, Caroline remembered an old memory. In the same way, she had taught young Brenda how to paint. As the day began to wane, the sisters sat on the shoreline a little distance away. "Those photos and the bracelet you gave me that day," Brenda said quietly. "I've been carrying them around all the time." She took out the old bracelet from her pocket. "I remembered. The day we made this bracelet. You said, 'This is a magic bracelet, it keeps us connected even when we're apart.'" Caroline smiled. "You remember." I had forgotten. The important things, Brenda gazed at the lake's surface. "But from now on, things will be different." In their line of sight were children playing happily. The sunlight dyed the water surface gold, heralding the beginning of new hope. Caroline thought, perhaps real family isn't about blood ties, but about honesty and care for each other. And sometimes, even if it's lost, it can be found again.